Hi everyone, hope you're all keeping well today. Thanks for joining us for another FlowForma's exclusive virtual workshops today, where you'll once again see a significant business process digitized in under an hour. My name is Conor McGrath. I'm a digital marketing executive here at FlowForma, and I'll be your host for today's session. And we're really excited about today's webinar, and I think it'll be a lot of fun, as these workshop sessions usually are. So before we get started, I want to share just a few quick tips for participating in today's workshop session. Please note that the workshop today is being recorded, and the recording will be shared post-workshop to you all. If you have any trouble with your audio or any other issues throughout the workshop today, you can email info@flowforma.com for any assistance that you may require. Your lines will be muted for the duration, but I suggest that you use the chat box to answer or ask any questions that you may have during the process build today. And also, after our session today, I would really appreciate if you could spend about 30 seconds just to complete a really short feedback form. They're really important when it comes to helping us create the content that you want to see. So if you could help us out with that, that'd be brilliant. Okay, so I am delighted to be joined today once again by my colleagues, David Shanley, who's product specialist here at FlowForma, and Aaron Fulton, territory manager here at FlowForma. Hi guys, thanks very much for joining me today.
Hi Conor, good to be here.
Hi Conor.
Okay, so once again, we wanted to give our audience today an insight into how easy it is to use the FlowForma process automation tool. It allows you to digitize your process quickly, gain rapid adoption, and get an early return on your investment also. So during this workshop session today, I would really ask our audience today to be as interactive as possible. So we've got a couple of polls that we'd really love you to take part in. And we love questions here at FlowForma, and as the saying goes, there's no such thing as a silly question. So please, by all means, fire over any questions that you may have throughout, and we'll do our best to pose those to Dave and Aaron whilst we are building this session, the process today during today's session. So yeah, please, by all means, fire those questions across to us. It'd be brilliant. With that in mind, I guess a good place to start maybe is to pull up a poll here and see where everyone is logging in from today, because I know we've got quite a diverse mix. I think so. Let's just pull up here on screen where everyone's dialing in from today. And we really appreciate you making the time. I know from previous workshop events, these are really fun and interactive sessions that we host. So really appreciate taking the time to fill that out. I might just leave it for another 5 seconds and I'll close that poll off. So I'll give 3, 2, 1. Super. And I'll just pull up the results on screen for everyone today. So it seems to be quite a North American and European audience today, with a few people dialing in from Asia and the Oceanic region too. So thanks very much. I know it's varied in time zones, so really appreciate you making time to log in today. Okay, so the results are in, and as you know, before today, sorry, Aaron?
Mini drum roll.
Thank you. The results are in. As you know, before today, we asked you all what process you would like to see digitized. And as you can see here, there's a clear winner, landslide, I would say. 44% of you all are looking to see a change request digitized during our workshop session today. I also just want to highlight a couple of the process challenges that some of our audience today, or our people who registered for this event today, are sort of experiencing. I guess I've got here that siloed manual challenges are a challenge for Alma. Risk mitigation and effort reduction, as well as another one from John there. And I also see that struggling with cumbersome and paper-heavy processes is another challenge that one of our audience members is experiencing. So there's a wide variety, I would say, of challenges being experienced today by our audience. So hopefully today's session you will glean some value from it, and we'll be able to help break down those barriers. So as I said, it's a really nice, interesting mix. But now we have the process. I'm going to let you take it from here, guys. So Aaron, I think.
Yeah, great stuff. I suppose just to kick off, Dave, 44% change request. Surprised or not surprised?
No, I'm not, because it's a process that can apply across all verticals. So yeah, it's a good choice.
It's a good fit. And I think the most important thing for people that's on the call as well, irrespective if you register to see travel request expenses, the design, the build, the methodology with regards to building out the change request is going to be very, very similar from that perspective. So it'll give you a lot of context, irrespective of the specific workflow that we're going to be building out. Connor, if you could just move on to the next slide, please. So I also appreciate there'll be a lot of people just coming to FlowForma for the first time. So just as a way of a sort of an understanding in terms of who FlowForma are and the space that we operate in, the only prerequisite to using FlowForma is that you're using SharePoint Online, which is part of your Office 365 package. The great thing from that perspective is staff that are using it will then authenticate using those credentials. So you've got all the nice things that come with that, alongside full audit trail, compliance, etc., etc. The real USP to FlowForma is that we're 100% no code, and Dave will showcase this in a bit more when we move through into the build from that perspective. But FlowForma has been built with its own data engine and its own data types, so it truly is a 100% no code tool. It's designed to be either used by business administrators, business users who want to drive automation projects within organizations. The only slight caveat we would see with that sometimes now, more recently, is IT teams are also starting to use FlowForma as well, just purely around the speed of build. So there's a number of different options that you have with regards to using the software. Connor, if you just move on to the next slide. So just in terms of where FlowForma is a great fit, in terms of complexity, where FlowForma excels is if you've got processes around that medium to complex space where there's maybe, say, 4 to 5 steps within a particular process. We typically find that that's where FlowForma is a fantastic fit. From a time to value perspective, it's really, really important from a FlowForma point. It's one of the key metrics that we actually measure ourselves against, is around the speed that organizations, from they start to use FlowForma to they actually go live. And we'll cover this off in a bit more detail as we move through. Agility, again, if you've got a process that you've built and you want to make a change to it, in FlowForma, that's really, really simple and straightforward to do, which again is a really, really strong aspect to the tool. We're all around adaptation at FlowForma. Ultimately, we want you to try and start to use the software and then scale as you move across the organization. And the easier the system to use from an end user perspective, the easier the task that becomes from an organizational perspective. Design is going to be important, but I'll leave that to Dave, because obviously Dave will take you through and build out the process. But I think at this point, with one more slide just to go, Connor, if you can just move on to the next slide just to give a bit more context. As I say, that's more to give you an oversight where potentially you can use FlowForma in. If you take the last 100 organizations that have started to use FlowForma, every organization will start with a different pain point. But again, that's just to give you a little bit of context where potentially you could see FlowForma being used. The purpose of today is all around the change request one. And as I say, with that, I'm mindful I don't want to eat into your time, Dave, from that perspective, because I know from doing these in the past that an hour flies in really, really quickly. So I'll hand it over to you to make a start on the change request.
Thanks, Aaron. I'm just going to share my screen, folks. I hope you can let me know.
Yeah, we're seeing it, Dave.
You can see it. Excellent. Okay, so what you're looking at here is the dashboard that a FlowForma administrator would interface with when they're building out processes. It's for the FlowForma admin, the person that designs the process. It's not where end users interact with forms. So if I was an end user and I was interacting with FlowForma via my browser, I might be going into, say, a SharePoint team site like this here, that will have the ability to initiate any form within the tenancy from this set of tiles here, and also engage in any pre-existing forms that require your attention. So that can all be pulled through from your tenancy, regardless of what site collection your processes live in. It can all be pulled through into this single dashboard here. What you can also do as well, which is very beneficial, is you can report on these too, obviously. So if I were to take, say, the health and safety process here, I push that data off into SQL in this instance, create a Power BI report and embedded it here. So you're giving the user that nice kind of holistic view of all the various different touch points that are relevant to them as an end user. You can also interact with FlowForma as an end user via your Teams interface using the FlowForma app that's built into Teams. And also as well, we have a FlowForma mobile app for both iOS and Android. And if we have time later on in the call, I might share with you very quickly the sample of a check sheet process that I recorded on my mobile phone, just to give you a sense as to what the interface looks like on mobile. So I'm going to scroll back up here and we're going to jump into the dashboard that the admin goes into. And I'm going to step through the form as an end user first, and then we're going to build it out again from scratch. So this is our process here. It's a webinar change request. And when the form opens up, you'll see the header portion is customizable. So I can come in here and I can obviously put in the title of the process here. I can also put a logo in here in the top right, should I wish. In the gray step bar, the 6 underneath, you'll see all the various different steps in the process. At the moment, it's moving sequentially from step to step, but you can also have scenarios whereby steps are running concurrently or in parallel. So we start off with our initial step here, and the currently engaging step is always in white. And as you can see here, you can see all the various different fields or questions the end user needs to interact with. And you can see here, I can select my customer here. Now, what I've done here in the background is I've created some native SharePoint lists that are very easy to manage and maintain. And we're using these in our list lookup questions for customer here, but also in this repeating table here as well. In this column of the repeating table, we're using a SharePoint list lookup as well. What that means essentially is it's just very easy to manage and maintain native SharePoint lists. You don't have to be a FlowForma administrator to go in and do that. And it saves having to go into the physical process build, maybe to change a choice question. We've got our impact levels here as well. We've got IT services impacted, again, native SharePoint lists here. We've got our description, multiple lines of text, impact of change, and estimated duration of downtime. Now, what's also happening here under the hood is we have business rules firing called question and workflow rules called question change rules. Now, question change rules fire on the trigger question where the question control is updated. The updating of the question control is the user going in and interacting with it here. In this case here, if I make change category equal to other, I'm going to show other. And that's a hide show question rule, and that's called a question change rule. You go to the trigger question and apply your rule there. You also have step level rules. So when I click submit, I might be firing a step completed rule. The step completed rule might be an email notification for the owner of the next step. It might be a step assigned to rule. I might be updating a list or a database. When I click submit, those rules will fire. So it's all about understanding your process, where you want your rules to fire and when. So you'll see here, do you approve technically the change request? If I were to approve it, happy days. We can ask then, is a CAB review required? If I say yes, we now have reviewed the RFC here. If I say no, it's gone. Again, that's a question change rule here. If I go and say request amendment, it's a different path altogether. So there's 3 question change rules stacked on this here, and they're all dependent on the path the user takes here. If I reject it, all the steps are gone subsequent to the technical review, and I'm asking for a reason for rejection. Just to move through here again, if I click submit, it can move on to formally scheduling the work. Put in the change implementer here. Submit it and move it through. So these steps here are a little bit lighter in terms of the amount of questions on them. Estimated duration of downtime. Maybe the actual duration is less, so we can do a calculation here. Difference is 4. And then we're pushing through then to the request evaluator to determine if the review is actually successful or not. And they can input their comments. And that's what we're going to build out. A lot of the rules we're going to be applying here at question change level and step level are going to be on the initial steps. So I'm going to close this out here. I'm going to go into create a new process flow.
It's fair to say you haven't picked something easy there, Dave. There's quite a bit of complexity to it as well, which is a good thing, isn't it?
Exactly, yeah. So I'm going to just call this CR webinar and click save. So this is the name of the process, and this is going to open up Flow Designer. So Flow Designer essentially is a 3-in-1 toolkit. It combines your forms, your workflow, and your document generation capabilities in a single build interface. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to add your steps to your process. If you haven't used FlowForma before, you might want to toggle on form preview, which is going to give you a visual representation of what you're building as you're building it. So for example, if I were to go in and I was to create my first step here, I could go add step, paste in the step title here, assign a form creator, which I'm going to do for each step so I can move through it quickly. And you'll see here, there's my first step. If I were to select that step and add a question to that step, such as say the change requester, this is my question editor here. That's my question title. I have all my various different question types. There's loads to choose from. What I'm going to use here is a SharePoint person or group. I'm going to set it to the current user. I won't make any questions mandatory at the outset, but you'll see my form building up here as I'm building. And for the moment, I'm going to toggle this off. I'm just going to build this way. So again, I'm going to start by adding all my steps. We have our initial step, create request for change. We then have our second step, which is technical review. So I'm going to move through the adding of the steps and questions quite quickly. Irregardless of the tool you use, this part is quite straightforward in most tools. It's all down to the application of your business and workflow rules, really. That's where FlowForma excels, and you'll see why shortly. So I'm just adding all my steps here. And I'm just copy pasting this from Notepad so you don't hear me thumping away at my two-finger typing.
Just when you're building that, Dave, I'm just gonna, there's a quick question that's come in with regards to somebody's asked, can the branding and color be changed? Yeah, 100%. You can change the branding to obviously your own company logos, your own colors, etc., etc. So all that functionality is there.
Yeah. Implement change, and our last step is just going to be request for evaluation. So I'm just layering this up by adding my steps. So the step is basically, it's a block of content you can attribute to a person or to a group of people. It's like a task, essentially. These are all my steps in place. Once I have my steps in place, I want to look to add my questions to each step. So we've already added one question here, and we're going to continue adding our questions. We have our customer. Who's our customer? So what I've done in the background is I've created some native SharePoint lists. You'll see here in my lists here, you'll see here's my customer list here. So if you've worked with SharePoint before, a lot of functionality and how you manage and maintain these lists carries through from Excel, so it's very easy to manage and maintain. So I've got a customer. It's going to be a lookup. That's going to be looking up a native SharePoint list. And that list lives down here. And here's my list here. See our customers, and it's locking into the title column there. Next thing we're going to add is our change category. So what type of change is this? So change category is my question title. We'll make this a choice. And to our choices, we're going to have 4 choices, one of which will be other. So I'm going to go into my choice values and just paste them through here. Click save. And if other is chosen, you know what, we want to capture what that is. So all I'm doing here is I'm adding all the questions that may or may not be needed. We'll leave that a single line of text. Now I'm going to add a repeating table, and this is going to be called business unit impacted. So I'm going to add a question for that. And that's going to be a repeating table. And in this case here, I won't show the question title. And my first sub question or my first column in that table is going to be business unit. And again, I've got a native SharePoint list sitting in the background that we're going to look up. And I'm just going to pick that list out here. That's it. And again, it's locking into it for me. And what I also want to do is add a column here for the impact level, high, medium, or low. And again, you can decide how you want to represent this, depending on the number of choices, depending on how the user is interacting with this. You might have it as a drop-down, or you might decide to have it as a radio button, which we'll try out here. That's my table in place. And I'm going to go for a description. Which I'm going to set as multiple lines of text in this case here. Now we're going to have impact of change. And again, that's high, medium, low. The choice. And as with all questions, I can make questions mandatory. I can put in tooltip descriptions that appear to the right of the question title. Obviously, whilst I'm testing and building here, I'm going to leave it non-mandatory. So what's our estimated duration of scheduled downtime? So once I've got the fields in the second step built in, I'm going to start jumping into my rules, and we'll finish off the final steps, which are mainly just field captures directly after. Estimated duration of downtime is going to be a number. I can also bracket things, minimum and maximum. And then we have our amendment comments. Now, the reason we're adding amendment comments here is if it does come back to this step, we need to be able to see the comments that were sent back from the technical review step. And these amendment comments will be multiple lines of text. Click save and save. And at any time, I can just click here. I can also render a test form. See how the form looks. Make sure I'm happy with the content here. I'm going to close that down. I'm just going to add a few questions here to my technical review, and then we're going to jump into our question change rules and step level rules. So I've selected my second step here. I'm going to add my questions. So to my questions for technical review, I'm going to have approver. That's going to be the individual that's doing the review. That's going to be a person or group. And again, I'll just set that to the current user. We're going to have the proposed schedule, start, date, and time. So again, there's only another 3 or 4 questions I need to add here, and then we're done. We'll have that as a date and time question. Then we have our critical question here. Do you approve technically the change request? And there's going to be a few rules sitting on this question here. So do you approve it? And we're going to make that a choice. And the choices are going to be approve, request amendment, and reject. So I'm going to pop these down as my choices. I'll leave it as a drop down for the moment. Now, what I need to then add is the various different questions that are needed dependent on that approval. So if it's approved, it's fine, it just moves on. If an amendment is requested, we need to capture what those comments are. So I'm going to add amendment comments. I'm going to make that multiple lines of text. Save. And I'm going to add reason for rejection, because that might be the path that the user takes if they reject. And again, I'll make that multiple lines of text. And one last question here. If it is approved, we're going to ask the technical reviewer, does this require a CAB review? And that would just simply be a yes or a no. Which is here. So what we'll do is we'll start applying some business workflow rules to our initial 2 steps first, and then we'll continue building once we have that done, because the bulk of the rules and the heavy lifting here are on the initial 2 steps. So again, at any moment in time, I can click on the step I'm working on and I can preview it here by clicking on the preview. Now, what's a very useful exercise here is to look at the questions once you've added them to your step and understand what you want to have happen and where when it comes to business and workflow rules. So obviously, we've got a question here. Do you approve technically the change request? If that's the path that's taken, I don't want to see amendment comments. I don't want to see reasons for rejection. I do want to see, does this change require a CAB review? If the answer is request amendment, that's what I want to see, amendment comments and nothing else. If it's reject, I just want to see reason for rejection. But what also has to happen here is, if it's going to be rejected, I want to close off all the subsequent steps here in this form. So the moment I click submit, if it's rejected, that's it, it's gone, it's closed. What I might be doing then is sending an email with the reasons for rejection potentially embedded in that email for the initiator. So I'm going to close this here for a moment. I'm going to go back into my first step. And what's a very useful exercise here as well is to kind of lock in where you want to have your rules triggered and so on, is visualize what you want to have happen and where. So again, on my initial step here, the change requester, that's the system pulling into that is, I want to make that read only. So I've just made it read only, question control. The change category, I know if other is chosen, it's at that point that I want to capture what other is. So I'm going to hide other, which is this question here. My trigger point to determine whether it's required or not is here. And this is where I apply my question change rule. So question change rules fire on the trigger question where the question control is updated. So if I choose other, I'm going to use a hide show question rule. If change category equals other, show other, this question directly underneath. So I'm on my trigger question. If I go to my add rules, you see all the rule categories that are available to me for question change rules. There's a lot of depth here. In reality, especially when you're building out at the outset, you're going to be using a lot of workflow control rules, maybe as much as 70, 80% of the time. You've also got all these data integration rules here. So a lot of depth to the tool. Communications, SharePoint actions. So there's lots you can do here. What we're going to look to do at the outset is we're going to use a hide show question rule. And I know if I edit my conditions, I know that if change category equals other, so all I have to do is drill down into my first step. If change category equals other, if that condition is fulfilled, I know what I want to do. I want to show, again drilling down, I want to show other that's hidden by default. And again, you can have condition combinations, group conditions. You can have multiple actions as well. I might be showing some questions, hiding others. I might be enabling, disabling question controls. But that's my first business rule in place here, the question change rule, and it sits on this trigger question here. And again, it's all about context. If I'm going back into a build at a later point in time, and I'm cycling through my questions, this defaults to question summary, customer, question summary, change category, defaults to the rule that's in place here. So you can see all the rules where they are because it's a single build interface. You're not jumping from a form rendering component through to a workflow rendering component and knitting the two together. That's my first business rule in place, question change rule. If I move back down here, amendment comments on the initial step, they're not needed at the outset. They're going to be hidden. When they are visible, they shouldn't be editable. So it's hidden and read only. Moving down into my second step here, the approver, I'm going to make that read only. Proposed schedule starts, fine. Do you approve technically the change request? So these questions here, these 3 questions here I'm going to hide because I don't know the path the user is going to take. The trigger point is here. So let's build out these rules here. So do you approve technically the change request? I'm going to go into my add rules, hide show question rule again. And I know if the answer is approve, I know what the outcome should be. And what you have to do here, and you have to be mindful of, is that the user can change their mind. So you want to factor in all the various different paths the user can take. So if do you approve equals approve, if that condition is fulfilled, what do I want to do here? I want to drill down. I want to hide amendment comments. I also want to hide reason for rejection. But what I want to show is, does the change request require CAB approval or CAB review? And that's my rule in place there. And again, What's useful to do is to copy it through to your title here as well, because then you can see contextually what that rule is doing when you click on it in Flow Designer. So again, if I'm clicking here, question summary, clicking here, I can see my first rule. Next rule I'm going to apply here is in the event of it being a request amendment. So edit conditions. So all I'm doing here is factoring in all the various different paths and outcomes. If I go in here and drill down, if it's equal to request amendment, if that condition is met, what do I want to do? I want to drill down. I want to show amendment comments. I also want to hide reason for rejection, but I also want to hide cab. And those are my conditions for this path. And there's one last path I have to take here for my hide show questions, and that's if it's rejected. So again, add rule, hide show question. The outcome here is reject, edit conditions, drill down to my second step. If that's equal to reject, if that's the path the user decides to take, what do I want to do here? I want to drill down. I want to hide amendment comments. I want to show reason for rejection. And I want to hide, does this change require cab approval? And those are my three different outcomes from that single question. And those are, again, as I said, those are called question change rules. And they fire in the trigger question where the question control is updated. And what's very useful to do here as well is just that you can do a very, very quick test on this here as well, just to make sure that everything is behaving as it should. If I go into my technical review step here and create a test form, I can go in here and take a look at this here. So I can go in, if I go approve, I'm asked, does it require cab review? If I go request amendment, amendment comments, if I go reject, reason for rejection. And again, change my mind again. Now what I want to do here is, on this one, I want to put a question change rule here. If this requires a cab review, then I'm going to show review the RFC. So I'm going to hide this step by default, but my trigger point is going to be here. I'm going to close that out. I'm going to go back into my tech review, and this is my question change rule here. So again, we've got three question change rules here. You can see them. We're going to add one more here. Add rules, a hide show step rule. Edit conditions. Drill down into my second step. If the answer to that is equal to yes, then I want to show my cab review step. So I'm going to show here, review the RFC, and I'm going to, again, just for neat, so I'll copy through my condition into my title here as well. I'm going to hide review the RFC here. And now if I go in and create a test form, you'll see our review the RFC step appearing once I take the appropriate path here. You can see there is no RFC step. If I go yes here, there it is. Now what I want to look at is, let's say we're passing back. So again, if I request an amendment, I want to be able to put my comments in here. And the moment I click submit, I want to fire a step completed rule this time. So we've been looking at question change rules so far. When I click submit, I want to be able to pass it back to the previous step. What I also want to be able to do is show the comments now that are hidden on the previous step and copy these comments back. And they're step completed rules. So I'm going to apply these here next. So again, the distinction here really is just where you physically apply your rules. So question change rules on the trigger questions, as we can see here. Step level rules, you simply go to step level. So technical review is my step. If I go to my add rules, I go to hide show step, or rather not hide show step, pass back, I should say. If I go to pass back here, I know that if request amendment is a choice that the approver makes, it's going to send it back to change request for change. I'm going to go edit conditions. I'm going to drill down into my second step again. If the answer is equal to request amendment, if that condition is fulfilled, it's simple business logic, it's 100% no code, I want to send it back to the change request for change step. And again, for neatness, I'm going to just pop through my condition here. And you know you're at step level because the event is completing, which means that those rules will fire the moment the user clicks the submit button. Step starting rules for the next step fire directly after, but you can also have step saving rules as well, for example. So I could be saving my progress on a form and returning to that step at a later point in time, if that's the way it's designed. That's my first rule, step level. My second rule is a hide show question rule. And again, you can get into the rhythm of building here very quickly. You're using hide show question rules, hide show step rules continuously. As you'll see here, I'm drilling down to my second step. If the answer to that equals, again, request amendment, I know we've passed back to the previous step. So now I want to show on the previous step amendment comments that are hidden by default. And the very last thing I need to do here is copy back to the initial step the technical reviewer's comments. So again, in this case, it's going to be data integration. It's going to be a set question value rule. And all I'm doing here is I am taking the amendment comments from here. I'm copying back. Hang on, let me just check what I do here. Target questions, amendment comments here, actually. And I'm going from my source here, which is the second step. These guys here. And just to show you what we've built so far, I'm going to close this out. I'm going to create a new form. And here it is. Okay, we've got our customer, list lookup, change category. We have a question change rule here. If other is chosen, it's asking what that is. We've got our list lookups here in our initial column. Got our description, our high, medium, low. You could put colors associated with these choices as well if you wanted to. I've got my estimated duration. On submit, I could have step completed rules firing. I might be assigning the next step to a specific technical reviewer, sending them an email. On receipt, they can click on the link, take them through to their respective step here. Now, all the information captured on the initial step can be copied through to the next step, or you can give the owner of the second step permissions to review the content on the initial step, as I'm doing here, and they can review it read-only. It's up to you how you propagate the data that's captured in the form. If I click on this step here and I'm not happy to proceed, you'll notice here if I go reject, and if you just finish that rule there, if I go request amendment here, and I go submit, I'm going to pass it back to the previous step, and we're going to see on the previous step the amendment comment, so I can make the appropriate change here and push it back on again. If I go approve, it's going to ask me, does a CAB review required? And if I say yes to that, we now have a review the RFC step. I'm just going to jump back out here and go into my process build again. It's an agile tool. It's all about making changes and refinements. You don't have to get it 100% right first time. If you make a mistake, no big deal. You can go in and change it very, very quickly. It's all about
I know you're used to it, Dave, from that perspective, but the reality is to build that complexity of a workflow out there in like under half an hour is incredible, isn't it? And you're literally using the same facets, the same parts of the Flow Designer on a regular basis.
Yeah, you are, in essence. So I'm going to move through to the review the RFC step here, which is our CAB step that may or may not be required. I'm going to add my questions to that. And my first question is, do you approve the change request? I'm going to make that a yes, no. And if the answer is no, I'm going to have a reason for rejection. And I'm going to make that multiple lines of text. And again, I'm going to hide reason for rejection. Trigger point to determine whether or not it's required is going to be here. Do you approve the change request? If the answer to that is equal to no, I want to see the reason why. So again, add rules, hide show question, edit conditions. Only this time I'm drilling down into review the RFC. If the answer to that equals no, and again, it's simple business logic, 100% no code. If that condition is fulfilled, what am I going to do? I'm going to show, again, drilling down, reasons for rejection. And again, you can test this as you're building, just to make sure that the business logic that you're applying, the workflow logic you're applying is on message. And just close out there for a moment because that step is hidden. I'm going to make it visible. And I'm going to go back in there again. And see if I say no, ask me for a reason. Now what I'm going to do here is, if the answer is no, I don't want to see any of these subsequent steps here. I'm going to kill the form off at that point. So again, I can use a hide show step rule here. And again, subject to the same condition, drill down, that's equal to no. If that condition is fulfilled, I want to hide all the subsequent steps here. Okay. And again, you can test it really quickly. Create a test form. And our steps are gone. Change our mind, and they're back. So it's the speed at which you can make these changes is key, integral to how FlowForma works. It's all about getting the iterations, getting it right, and getting it out, and getting that strong end user adoption. So I'm going to go into my formally scheduled work step here. I'm going to add a couple of questions. I'm just going to have a date for the change. Just going to make that a date only. I'm going to have the change implementer. I'll make that a person or group. So once you have a change implementer here, you can use a step assign to rule then to assign the next step to that individual, which we'll do now in a moment. The implement change step, we've got a few questions in here, including a calculated question, so I'll go through these very quickly. First one is a yes, no, has a change been implemented? Next one is the date of implementation. Estimated duration schedule down. And so I'm going to do a calculation here. And this is something you'd use quite a bit in expenses processes as well. You're doing calculations maybe based on mileage rates and so on. Travel expenses, you could work this into a repeating table. So I've got estimated duration of scheduled downtime here. Would be a number. And then we have our actual scheduled downtime. Another number. And then you have your difference, and that's going to be a calculated question type. And that's going to be estimated minus actual. Click save. And very last question, or last step, I should say, is our request for evaluation post-change reviewer. And you see the speed at which this can be put together.
Yeah, incredible.
I've got a post-change reviewer, which would be a person or group. I'm going to set that to the current user. I'll make that read only because that's the system putting in that name. We don't need to be able to edit it. Post-change review date. I'll set it to the current date. And satisfied, yes or no. And that's it kind of pretty much built. So again, as I said, a lot of the heavy lifting is in the initial steps. I will apply another few rules here now. So what I might do is, just to show you another few rules in action, we have our formally scheduled work. So we've got a change implementer here, which is implemented, which is a SharePoint user. At step level, once that field is populated, I could go in here, add rules. I could use a step assign to rule. And I could assign that step, implement change, to a person defined in a question. And that person is the person captured here in formally scheduled work. I can govern it with a condition as well. In this case, there isn't any condition. I can leave it as is. That can be my step assigned to rule. I could also have a send email rule here as well. For example, if I went into communications, into send email, I could create an email from scratch here, or I could use a pre-existing email template to create one from scratch. I have my body copy here, so we might give it a title, say implement change. So what I could do in this email template, I can pull tokens through from the form, so I can customize it. Dear, so I know who this individual is going to be, so I can have their first name and second name here. Dear change implementer, comma, please click, and I'm just going to give them then just a form link here. And that will allow that individual to engage directly with the form by clicking on the link in the email. So we've got our email template in place. I can decide who it's from here. So it could be the owner of the step here. And I can also then decide who's been sent to. So it's a user defined in the question. That user is this individual here. Lots of other things I can do here as well. So if I'm uploading documents, for example, I can bolt those documents onto the email that's sent, which is very useful if you're sending content through to external parties. That can be an uploaded document, or it can be a generated document within FlowForma as well. And again, it's all about context. I can see where my rules sit and why they sit where they sit. So if I'm closing this out and I'm going back into this build at a later point in time, it's very easy for me, or indeed anybody else, to go in and see what's been built. It's all about context. It's a single interface. Expanding this out here, I can see where my rules are. I can see what the rules are, and I can see why they're positioned where they're positioned, rather than have to go from a form rendering interface through to a workflow interface. All of this is built in to Flow Designer. It's designed from the ground up for process owners, rather than a lot of the solutions that are out there that were initially for developers, but have been kind of shoehorned into citizen developer tools. This is 100% no code, ground up process owner digital transformation tool. That's what it's for.
A lot of change in a very short space of time.
Yeah, it's a quick. I mean, it's not obviously the first time I've built anything, but
yeah.
you know, 2 days training, you can get up to speed, absolutely no problem. The effort really is in understanding your process and doing that depth of analysis. Once you know what it is you want to build, and it's your process, you own it, it's very easy then to apply it here. It's all about just understanding where you need to apply your workflow and business rules. I know it came up in the conversation earlier, visual form designer here. If I want to go in here and customize a look and feel form, I can do that very easily. So if I wanted to go in, say, for example, and say change the coloring here, step colors, maybe I want to go with some sort of a maroon here, I can do that. Change my background color. I can do all this very, very quickly here.
And I know one other thing that we get asked a lot, Dave, is obviously once you've now built that on desktop, it's automatically available on Android or iOS device as well. So you don't have to go in and build the same application again for the mobile.
No, it automatically builds for you. Actually, what I might do is I might just show this as well here, because this is going to be pertinent to anyone that was interested, say, Permis Hotworks or Permis Dig and so on. So this is a recording of the my iPhone here, and I'm going to be initiating a check sheet. It's a two-step process in this instance here. So you'll see me creating a new form here. I'm selecting the check sheet. It's going to open up the first step. I'm using cascading list here to drill down, select an appropriate site for a project. I've got a geolocation here as well, which is going to pinpoint where I need to pinpoint on the map here. And we've got a repeating table in this form here, and we're using cascading list lookups. Actually, no, we're just mapping straight through into a fixed table here. So what this would be used, say, on a device where you need to take a picture on site, for example, of the excavator there. Maybe there's an issue with the bucket in it. If I want to select that, I can embed it in my form here in the appropriate row in the table and annotate over it and mark off what the issue is. Put in my comments and the current status of it, have I checked it or not. So I can go through, in this case here, it's a fixed table. It could be a dynamic table, as you saw in the form I built out there. This is fixed, which means the user has to interact with each row. You can make them mandatory. Once I've done that, I can use a wet signature here if I want to sign off, maybe use my finger or stylus on my device. When I click submit, it's going to move through to the next step, which is a supervisor step. Now, the supervisor obviously can go in and access this via their mobile, or maybe they interact via their browser, whatever way they want to. Once they go in, and I own this step incidentally, so I'm going to go straight into it. They can go and review the content submitted by the initiator here again. So I'm clicking on as a supervisor here. It's opening up in the second step. I can click on the previous step. I can take a look and review what's been submitted. And if I'm happy, I can approve it. But as we built out in our change request here, you'll see a hide show question rule. If request amendment is selected here for approve, it's asking me what that is. And again, if I change my mind, I can change my mind, click submit, and close out the form. And that process there would have been built out in a couple of hours. And again, it's a speed at which you can build. It's the ability to make changes and refinements very quickly. It's much more collaborative than leaving something in the lap of IT, where they can have resource challenges. It might take a while for that to get back to the process owner, and a lot of the time when that happens, there can be a disconnect. So the process changes over time. What's delivered may not reflect that. So it's all about the speed which you can build. It's all about end user adoption and agility.
Brilliant. Well done, Dave. That was a bit of a whirlwind, I would say, but well done. That's record time, I think, 40 minutes or so to actually start from scratch. So well done.
Nice.
Impressive.
Very much so. Before we've coming right up to time, but we've got a little bit of time for some questions that did come in. I know Dave was mid-flow there. It was hard to get a word in. So we might get some questions just after.
Nothing new there, Connor. Nothing new there.
I'm very curious, before we wrap up today, I've got one last poll that I'd like to share with you, and it's asking about what outcome is most important to you from digitizing your process. I think that's a really interesting question, and I'm sure it's really varied from our audience today. So I'm just going to pull that up really quick for everyone to answer. So you've got the ability to automate processes in-house. You've got speed at which you can digitize processes, which I think is really, really important, and you've probably seen it there unfolding in front of your eyes today. You've got integration with other systems, which I think is really, really key to in the current climate, and strong report capabilities, which I think also are sort of a wide sort of challenge I think that people are having with reporting and visibility. So I'm just going to give you another few seconds on that before we wrap up today. So I might close that in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And I might just pull them up on the screen very, very quickly. So 75% of people are saying the ability to automate in-house. So I think, guys, that's very pertinent today, given that the agility that that Dave was working with here, and how those changes can be made. We've got 25% speed at which you can digitize processes, and you've got 25% integration with other systems. So quite a varied mix there, I'd say, but the ability to automate in-house seems to be a clear winner, guys.
And just on the integration with other systems at a high level, we've got our built-in rules you can call as your logic apps. So if the connector lives in logic apps, you can integrate in that way. You can also use our call external API. So once there's a REST API available as well, we can pull and push data that way too.
Brilliant. Okay, let's try and squeeze in a couple of questions before we wrap up today. We might give people a little some time back, so we're pushed right up on time. There is a question that came in today, Aaron. It might be one that you could take for us, and it's asking, what tips have you got that can help to prioritize which process to automate? I think that's probably a good question. I think that people are often challenged with basically where to start, I guess.
Yeah, sure. I suppose we've touched on it a few times during the webinar, but for us at FlowForma, it's all around adoption, that ability to get something live really, really quickly. The advice that I would give from that perspective is to take staff feedback with regards to where they want to automate.
Sure.
Take that on board, and then start with the low-hanging fruit, i.e. those processes that's a real pain for staff that you can deliver really, really quickly from that perspective. So if you can deliver something within 2 to 4 weeks that makes people's roles easier, that really drives additional requests and additional hunger and desire to move forward with it, additional areas where you can automate from that point.
Super. There's another question in here. There's some questions that we actually kind of covered off, I think, Dave, throughout. So there's another question here, though. Aaron, you might be able to take this one first as well. That's asking, how soon could I see an ROI from implementing FlowForma? I think that's a really nice question, and probably something that's quite common, I guess.
Yeah, so from an ROI perspective, again, I touched on it previously. From a FlowForma point, one of our key KPIs is how quickly we can put you live from that point. So from a FlowForma perspective, it wouldn't be unrealistic to see somebody seeing an ROI after 4 weeks, whereby they've got processes live and in production. And then from that, you can then go ahead and automate additional processes, which further leverage the ROI, which is, again, what the senior management within organizations want to see.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, we've got time for one last question. I think it might be very quick, and it is an area that you covered off already, Dave. It's asking, I've got a lot of staff in remote areas. Would the FlowForma tool work for remote users? I know you were using you were looking at the imagery there and the annotate images. So
So it's used a lot for on-site processes, particularly in the construction vertical. It also has offline capabilities as well. So you can engage with FlowForma using FlowForma mobile app for both iOS and Android, and again, offline capability. So that recording you saw there was taken from my own iPhone.
Brilliant. Yeah, the offline capability is really important, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think that's all we have time for, unfortunately. Thanks for submitting any questions that you had throughout. Like I said earlier, it's a bit of a whirlwind today getting that one over the line, but well done again, guys. So yeah, if you've got any questions, we'll be sure to get those answered for you in the coming days. Unfortunately, we didn't get to those today, but thanks for submitting them. And yeah, just before we wrap up, a quick reminder too that you can book a one-to-one call with any of our process experts here in-house on our website, or you can also sign up for a free trial, 14 days on flowforma.com. So seeing is believing, I guess, really, isn't it? As we've learned here today. So yeah, our experts there are more than happy to steer your project in whatever direction is required. So please be sure to reach out with any questions or queries that you may have after today's webinar. And as I mentioned earlier, we've got a short survey form, might take only 20 to 30 seconds to fill out for us. If you could do so, it would be brilliant. But thanks very much, everyone, for joining us, and most importantly, thanks very much for David and Aaron for helping me out here today. Thank you very much, guys. Well done.
Thanks for having us, Connor. Cheers. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, everyone. I appreciate it. And hopefully see you again on another workshop webinar soon.